Hello everyone, in today's lesson I will cover the last three games on how to attack along the e-file. But before we start, I want to have a quick recap on what we have learned in our previous lessons, and also introduce to you guys some important new ideas. So first for the recap. 1. If you see that your opponent's king is uncastled, try to discourage or prevent them from castling. Then try to attack along the e-file. If certain factors are on the board, such as your opponent's king and queen, and your own rook on the same file, try to open up the e-file with forcing sacrifices, because such attacks will usually prove to be decisive. Okay, in today's lesson, we will discuss what Vukovic calls focal points. In games, often your opponent will have only one or two pieces guarding the critical e2 square, which defends the opponent's king. If you create e2 into a focal point and focus your calculations on deflecting and undermining the defense of this focal point, finding the right moves will become almost simple. Keeping these new ideas in mind, let's start with the first game played between Hansen and London. Also note that in the book, only a diagram of the last few moves are given, so I felt that it would be helpful to see how the position arose in the diagrams. So I'll present to you the entire game. And as always, all the chessgames.com links will be given to you in the video description below. So let's start. The game started with e4, e5, f4, e takes f4, knight to f3. And this is known as the King's Knight Gambit, accepted. And then black plays an interesting line, d5, e takes d5, knight to f6, knight to c3, and this is known as the modern Scandinavian variation in the King's Gambit accepted. And I think theorists say this is supposed to be an equal line for both black and white. So black continued knight takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and the opening moves are pretty accurate for both players, so I'm not going to go too much in depth. d4, bishop g4, bishop takes f4, knight c6, bishop e2, castle long, and then white plays the move c3. Now here I want to pause and talk to you a little bit about this position. Here, white probably should have just castled on the king side and gotten his king to safety. Guarding this d-pawn was not immediately necessary, and in fact when I was analyzing this over the board, I found an interesting variation that goes along the lines of after white castles, if black decides he wants to take this d-pawn, of course, which he's entitled to, he can play knight takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, queen takes d4, check, king to h1, and then black can actually take another pawn on b2, so queen takes b2, and after bishop e5, queen a3, rook a to b1. White's position is very active, and it looks like, at least in my opinion, white has enough compensation for his two lost pawns, and white will probably gain these pawns later on in the future, because if you look, these rooks all have nice open files, this bishop has nice diagonals, and black's pieces are all very passive. So, with the slow c3 move, we can use our new knowledge of focal points and target it. So let's move back to the original position. So here I put c3, right? So we first have to identify what the focal point is. So in this position, obviously, since we know that the topic is attack along the e-file, we can pinpoint that e2 is the focal point. So London finds the correct move, queen e4. And this is a great move for a few reasons. One, it is very forcing because it attacks white bishop on f4. So white must either retreat this bishop or defend it. Second, it pins the light squared bishop to the king. And this truly makes e2 into a focal point. And in the game, unfortunately for white, white played the very dubious move queen d2. Okay, so I'm saying this is dubious, but now it is up to black to prove that this is dubious. So we have reached the diagram position in the book. Here, black has a decisive tactical shot against white's king. In this position, instead of asking you guys to pause your videos and try to solve it yourself, I will take this time to present to you my thoughts when I was calculating and how I found the correct move. And this way you will get an idea of how you can use the focal points we discussed earlier into your calculations. Once you master this, these tactical ideas in your own games will suddenly pop out at you. Okay, so when I first saw this position, I realized a few things. One, the e2 focal point is only guarded by one piece, this queen. Secondly, the white knight on f3 is the only thing standing in the way of my bishop's attack on the focal point. With these things acknowledged, a plan becomes to materialize. I must somehow deflect both the white queen and the f3 knight. Of course, if I can successfully achieve this, I can force checkmate on e2. However, this task seems to be a very hard task to accomplish. How does one even begin to deflect both pieces? In these types of positions, where I have to deflect both pieces in order for our attack to work, I look at what squares and pieces both the queen and the knight are guarding. And if I quickly scan the board, it shows me that the d4 pawn, right here, is the only piece that both the queen and the knight are guarding. Therefore, after some careful calculation and taking into consideration some basic tactics, because the c3 pawn also guards d4, I easily found the move rook takes d4. And rook takes d4 is a truly wonderful move that highlights the power of utilizing focal points in your calculations. Note that the reason I mentioned some careful calculation was required was that I had to see that, of course, c takes d4 is not possible here because of the immediate bishop b4, and now the queen is being skewered to the king. So after rook takes d4, white played knight takes d4. So now, as you can see, the first deflection is successful. And after knight takes d4, c takes d4, and obviously once again queen cannot take on d4 because of this mate. So after c takes d4, we have the final move, bishop b4 check. So even though this knight isn't guarded by even though this bishop isn't guarded by a knight on c6 anymore, this move is very important because it is the final blow to this combination. This move threatens to deflect the white queen from its defensive duties of the focal point. Now the king is forced to move, or else mate is inevitable, because obviously if the queen is successfully deflected, then once again this is checkmate. So the rest of the game continued. King f2, bishop takes f2, bishop takes d2, sorry, and now the queen is gone. Bishop takes g4 check, f5, bishop takes d2, f takes g4, rook h to e1, queen takes d4 check, bishop e3, queen takes b2, king f1, and after black plays rook e8, and white resigned because white is going to be losing even more material. So this was a very instructive game, showing how important focal points are. Also realizing that in the diagram position, okay, so let's go back to the diagram position. Okay, so yeah, this is the diagram position. So I also had to realize that time and force were of the utmost importance. Something like rook to e8 is too slow because white can simply play king to f2 and consolidate his position successfully. Now, of course, I have no rook takes d4 tactic, and white should be able to work his way out of his bind and get a nice game. Of course, knight takes d4 is not forcing enough because white can just respond with c takes d4, and the bishop b4 tactic is no longer working because the knight isn't on c6 to guard it anymore. So like knight takes d4, c takes d4, bishop b4, I can just take because the knight isn't deflected anymore, right? Okay, so now that you have a general idea of how you should logic your way through finding the correct moves to play using focal points, the next two games will be given to you as puzzles, so you can solve them yourself. So let's reset the board, and we're going to look at it from white's perspective. And this game is played between Ravinsky and Panov. So the game started e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, take, knight f6, knight c3. So this is, again, typical open Sicilian stuff. d6, g3, and I believe this is known as the I don't know how to pronounce it, Scheveningen, I think, or Scheveningen or something, fianchetto variation of the Sicilian. Bishop g2, right, so now it's fianchettoed. Bishop d7, castles, a6, and I also believe this is all book moves, so I'm not going to cover these moves too much. Bishop e3, rook c8, and white plays a nice move, queen e2. Even though there's no clear way for white to break open the e-file in this position, Ravinsky plays the preemptive move, which also connects his rooks. So he's anticipating that the e-file will open up in the future. So now the game continues b5, a3, of course guarding the square, so the b4 push is blunted. Knight e5, rook a to d1, knight c4, bishop c1, and bishop c1 is a nice move because even though it looks very passive, it 1 guards the square and 2 maintains the bishop pair, so white can keep his bishop pair for his attack later on. And then black plays an interesting move, knight takes a3. And this is an interesting tactic by Panov, because of course if white takes this knight with bishop takes c3, rook takes c3, and black's going to be up a healthy pawn for very little compensation in this position. Okay. But of course, white isn't obligated to take this knight. And because now that the knight is no longer guarding this e5 square, white can threaten to put lots of pressure onto black center with a timely e5. Now after Ravinsky played e5, black is now forced to play e takes e6, because, for example, if black plays the only other move, knight g8, e takes d6, knight c4, right, saving the knight, which is mandatory. Bishop b7 is coming, knight takes d6 is coming, bishop takes c8 is coming, so white is going to have a very nice attack going. And as you see, his pieces are all very undeveloped. So if you want to see this, played out, I can show you right here. Bishop b7, knight takes d6. Right, this pawn has to be taken. After knight takes d6, white can play like bishop takes c8, queen takes c8, and then something like bishop f4. Knight f6. Right, development is very important in this position. And then I can just simply play bishop takes d6, bishop takes d6, and then knight takes e6, where black's position is busted. So bishop takes e6, rook takes d6. And yeah, it's pretty hopeless for black here. So this is a variation I calculated that I thought was pretty good for white. So here, d takes e5 is forced, and then a nice move, knight c6, right? Attacking the queen with the knight, and also, right, the bishop can't take because of the pin. So black plays, I believe, queen c7, and white captures back on e5 here. And this knight is very, very powerful because it's centralized. So after knight takes e5, black plays knight c4, and white plays knight takes d7, knight takes d7, and then knight d5. And knight d5 is a very nice move that allows white to improve his knight with tempo on the queen. And once again, of course, the pawn can't take back because the pawn is absolutely pinned to the king. And after black played queen a7, knight f4, sorry. And this knight is very well placed to potentially threaten the e-file. And after knight e5, we have reached, let's play knight e5 here. And after knight e5, we have reached the diagram position in the book. So please pause your videos and use your new knowledge to target the correct focal point and find the tactical solution to this position. Okay, if you have paused your videos and cannot solve it, here's another hint. Sometimes the sacrifice of a rook or another piece is a powerful idea in open positions such as this one. It removes some critical defenders, and it is often very forcing. Okay, so please pause your videos once again if you didn't see it. Okay, so now the correct move is rook takes c7. So this is a nice sacrifice that forcefully weakens a defender of the king, the knight. So after knight takes d7, and if you're wondering why queen takes d7 doesn't work, so here, let's play queen takes d7 here. White can play queen takes e5, and after rook takes c2, I believe in my analysis I looked at bishop e3. And after queen to c7, white plays queen g. Wait, this is the wrong position, sorry. Oh, actually, no, this is the right position. And white can play something like queen g5 here. Yeah, queen g5. And white's position is pretty overwhelming with his bishop pair, and all his pieces are very active. Okay, let's go back. So here, I played rook takes c7, knight takes d7. And here, white plays the most important move of this position, knight takes e6. So the well-placed knight on f4 now fulfills its true role. It crashes open the e-file and forces e7 to become a focal point of attack. So after f takes, queen takes, and then bishop e7, this position should be very familiar, and this pattern should be ingrained in your minds. So after bishop e7, white plays rook e1, increasing the pressure on the e-file and the focal point. And then black is forced to play queen c5, which is the only way to defend this focal point. So after queen c5, you should have seen this position and saw the correct way to exploit the focal point. So if not, you should pause your videos now once more and try to find the proper method to deflecting the queen from its defense of the focal point. So here, b4 is very forcing. And black, in my opinion, played the correct move, knight f8. Actually, in Vukovic's book, he cited knight f8 as a very bad blunder with a question mark. And I actually think his line, queen takes b4, bishop g5, right, exploiting this focal point and the pin. Oops, and the pin. Queen takes e1, forced, queen takes e1, and knight f6. Vukovic said this line is very drawish for black, and black can seek some nice ways to force a draw. However, after looking at this position for quite some time, I found the move queen e6. And after queen e6, None of the remaining black pieces have anywhere useful to go, while white's pieces are all very active and he has the bishop pair. If you notice, black's king is still stuck in the center. Can't castle, obviously, because this queen guards this diagonal. This bishop can't move because of the pin. This knight can't move because of the checkmate threat on e7. And yeah, all of black pieces are useless. And then this rook is useless because it can't come out. So that's one position where I would have to say I disagree with Vukovic's analysis. So after b4, I think knight f8 is forced, attacking the queen. So Ravinsky brings his queen to a very nice square, g4. And I say this is a nice square because it keeps up the attack on the c8 rook while forcing black's queen to move somewhere that also guards this rook. However, remember, our original plan with playing b4 was to deflect the queen from its defense of the focal point on e7. So, of course, black cannot have the best of both worlds. He cannot defend both the c8 rook and the e7 focal point. So, black decides that the rook is more important and plays queen c3. So yeah, this move protects the rook but leaves the defense of the focal point. Therefore, white has a very nice move in this position. So please pause your videos once again and try to find the correct way to exploit the weak focal point. Okay, the correct move in this position is rook takes e7 check. So with this move, it forces the king to come forward into the direct line of the path of all of white's remaining active pieces, which include his bishop pair, which is very nice in trying to force mate. So after king takes e7, Ravinsky finds a nice checkmate pattern, bishop g5, right? He's utilizing the bishop pair and the fact that the bishop pair can control all the squares on a certain color. So after bishop g5 check, king d6, queen d1 check, king c7, bishop f4 check, king b6, queen d6 check, king a7, queen e7 check, rook c7, bishop takes c7, queen a1, and this is kind of desperation on black's part, bishop f1, knight g6, and this is already too late. He can't develop his pieces now and expect to get away with it. Queen c5 check, wait a second. Okay, I somehow messed up the move order in this position, so let me try to, I'm doing all of this blindfolded, right? I mean, like, without the book in front of me, so let me try to see where I went wrong. So yes, 30 queen d6 is a position I recognize. So king a7, queen e7. Oh, queen e7 check. That's where I went wrong. Okay, queen e7 check. Oh yeah, of course, queen d7 hangs the queen. So yeah, sorry about that. Queen e7 check, rook c7, bishop takes c7, queen a1, bishop f1, knight g6, and then now queen c5 check. Makes sense. King b7, bishop a5, setting up a mating net. And after rook f8, he's trying, like, black's desperately trying to seek some play but of course this is too late, and after queen b6, white is getting mated very soon. And to conclude this video, I will briefly analyze Steinitz versus von Bartelben, and I say only briefly because the analysis in the book is already very detailed, and the moves are quite explanatory. So let's reset the position once more. And in this position, in this game, white is Steinitz and von Bartelben is black. So here white plays e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, Gioco piano, c3, knight f6, d4, take, bishop b4 check, and this is known as the Greco variation of the Gioco piano. And then d5, and Vukilovic, I believe, in his book said that this isn't popular anymore, and black's best try is knight takes e4, which I agree with. So after d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, castles, bishop e6, bishop g5, and then black plays a probably dubious move, bishop e7. So I say this is dubious because it brings an active piece, which was actually doing something on b4, right, attacking, putting pressure on this knight, into a very defensive post on e7. And much better was probably just queen d7. And yeah, there's no reason to bring the bishop back to e7. So in this position, please pause your videos because try to see how white can force some favorable exchanges to create the familiar e7 focal point. Okay, so the correct way to create e7 into a focal point is bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, and then rook to e1. Right? In this position, knight e7 is a potential focal point, so white has to immediately solidify it into a focal point. So rook e1 pins this knight, and it's a focal point now. So white saw correctly, so Steinitz saw correctly in this position, that even after so many trades of pieces, white can retain a slight advantage, maybe even a clear advantage, because of the fact of the e7 focal point weakness. So after rook e1, black plays a reasonable move f6. So he's trying to artificially castle and get his king to safety. So of course white can allow this, and he plays queen e2, putting more pressure on that focal point and pretty much forcing the queen into a defensive role. So after queen d7, rook a to c1, c6, and in this position try to find a correct plan to maintain the pressure on the focal point and on black's king side in general. Okay, if you said d4, you are absolutely correct. Now, for those of you who didn't see d4, this might seem like a very hard move to see, because it just sacrifices a pawn, right? And of course the knight isn't obligated to take it. You can just take it with the pawn, and black seems to be fine. However, d4 is what is known as a clearance sacrifice. So you should have realized that so far every piece in white's camp is doing something active, except for the f3 knight. So the f3 knight is just sitting here. So now we have to find a correct way of improving this knight. So the true reason behind white's d5 pawn push is that we're going to try to relocate this knight to e6. And on e6, white's knight will control some very nice squares around black's kingside, and his original idea of artificially castling will become very hard to accomplish. So after c takes d5, white continues with his plan, knight d4, king f7, knight e6, rook h to c8, and then queen g4. So of course this threatens checkmate. So here, then here is checkmate. So of course black has to defend, and also realize that queen g4 threatens a nice discovery on the queen, because remember this queen is undefended by any of black's pieces right now. So after queen g4, I'm pretty sure g6 is forced, and then white plays a nice move, knight g5 check. So it uncovers a discovered attack on the queen with check on the king. So of course black has to defend the queen, so black plays king e8, moving back into this pawn, making e7 to a focal point again. And here, this position is very rich with the ideas we discussed earlier in this video. So please pause again and try to find the proper course of action. Okay, if you said rook takes e7 check, you are absolutely correct. And this is the very important rook sacrifice. Of course, if black plays queen takes c7 here, we can just play rook takes c8, rook takes c8, queen takes c8, and white will have no problem winning this position. So of course, after rook takes e7, white plays king f8. And here, of course, white cannot capture the queen right now because white is suffering, unfortunately, from some back rank weaknesses, right? Because the king has no escape squares to go to. So white plays this very, very nice move. Rook to f7, check. And of course, if the queen captures, we have the same thing. Rook comes down, check, queen takes, and of course it's going to be decisive again. So black can't capture, so he plays king g8. And we play rook g7 again, and this is a nice little tactic. And after king to h8, rook to h7, black resigned. And afterwards, according to chessgames.com and Vukovic's own analysis, Steinitz apparently demonstrated right after black resigned, saying there was mate in 10 moves. And the only way you could prevent this was by sacrificing all of your pieces. So he said after king to h8, rook takes h7 check, king g8, rook g7 again, check, king h8, queen h4, check, king takes g7, queen h7 check, king f8, queen to h8 check. So this isn't very important. I mean, white should be able to win this pretty easily. So to queen to h8 check, king to e7, queen to g7 check, king e8, what did he say? Queen g8, I believe again, check, king e7, so slowly working its way next to the king. Queen f7 check, and it's already looking very dangerous. Rook d8, queen f8 check, queen e8, and then knight f7 check. now after rook d7, queen d6 is checkmate. So that concludes this video lesson on how to attack the uncastled king along the e-file. The next video in this series will focus on how to attack the uncastled king by making either f7 or f2 into a focal point. So thank you guys for watching. Also, I would like to take this time right now to offer thanks to all of my subscribers who offered me constructive criticism on how to improve my videos. And hopefully this criticism on how to improve my videos was seen here in this new video, because I tried to make this one slightly better than the previous ones. So, of course, as always, let me know what you think in the comment section, and I will try to improve or fulfill what you guys are looking for. So, until next time, thank you very much. I will talk to you guys later.